They say a song can hold a truth that a conversation can never quite capture. For a legend like Willie Nelson, music has always been the purest language. He could confess his fears, his joys, and his heartbreaks into the neck of his battered guitar, trigger, with an honesty that felt like a direct line to the soul. For decades, the world saw him as the gentle, bandana-clad sage, the Buddha of country music, a man who rolled with the punches and floated above the fray on a cloud of forgiveness and Texas dust. But peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the choice to rise above it. And sometimes, that choice is a conscious one, made again and again, to walk away from those who cross a line that cannot be uncrossed. At 92, the narrative of the eternally placid Willie has matured into something more complex, more human. This is not a man preaching peace anymore. This is a man, in the reflective twilight of an unimaginable career, naming names. The story we are about to explore is not one of petty rivalry, but of profound artistic and personal betrayals. It is about the 7 relationships that fractured, sometimes silently, sometimes explosively, leaving scars on a man known for his open heart. These were not just colleagues. Some were brothers, legends he helped build, and stars he watched change the genre he loved into something he struggled to recognize. Their stories are a map of Willie Nelson's boundaries, his unwavering code on what constitutes real music, real friendship, and real integrity. We begin with a figure who represents, in Willie's eyes, the very transformation of country music from a soulful confession into a spectacular commodity. The first estrangement, the showman and the soul. At the very top of this unspoken list sits a name that might surprise many. The record-shattering superstar, Garth Brooks. To the world, Brooks is a hero, a man who brought country music to unprecedented global heights with his electrifying energy and monumental tours. But from the quiet, steadfast perspective of Willie Nelson, Brooks represented something else entirely, a fundamental shift that, in his view, traded the genre's aching soul for plastic perfection. The irony is not lost on Nashville's old guard. Here was Willie, the road-weary troubadour, still playing the same cherished guitar, singing songs of heartache and hard living in dusty fairs and honky-tonks. And there was Brooks, a decade into his reign, flying over screaming arena crowds on wires, triggering pyrotechnics that illuminated stadiums. To millions, it was magic, the ultimate celebration. To Willie, it felt like a funeral for authenticity. The core of the tension was philosophical. Willie's entire life and art are built on the bedrock of lived experience, the pain of divorce, the struggle of the farmer, the joy of simple pleasures. He once muttered to a bandmate after watching a particularly grandiose Brooks performance, "You can't sell struggle if you've never lived it." He saw the heartfelt plea of a song like Friends in Low Places, transformed into a boisterous, beer-soaked anthem, stripped of its inherent vulnerability and packaged as a Broadway-style spectacle. The quiet coldness between them turned to a tangible frost one night in 2004 at the Country Music Hall of Fame. Garth Brooks was on stage, offering public praise to Willie, calling him the conscience of country music. The cameras captured a moment of reverence from one icon to another. But backstage, away from the spotlight's glow, a different exchange occurred. As Brooks approached, Willie looked him in the eye and delivered a quiet, devastating line. "Next time, sing it like you mean it." That sentence, whispered yet profound, rippled through the industry's back corridors like a shockwave. It was the ultimate critique from the ultimate purist. For Willie, it wasn't about jealousy of success. It was a condemnation of a perceived lack of sincerity. Since that pivotal moment, Willie Nelson has maintained a respectful but absolute distance. Every invitation for a duet, every proposal for a shared stage at an award show, every photo opportunity has been quietly, consistently declined. His refusal is a silent protest. In Garth Brooks' world of high-flying entertainment, Willie Nelson saw the heart of country music growing still. He couldn't stand what he viewed as the genre's slide into a polished, emotionless product. This was the first major crack in the image of the all-forgiving Willie, a line drawn not in sand, but in the sacred soil of musical truth. The second estrangement, the sparkle and the grit. If Garth Brooks moved the stage to the arena, the next artist on Willie's path moved its spirit to the glittering strip of loss. Vegas. This rift was with the woman who became the undisputed queen of country pop crossover, Shania Twain. Where Willie's music was weathered denim and broken in leather, Shania's was sequence, choreography, and a dazzling, empowering smile. And for a man whose life's work was chasing a raw, unvarnished truth in every verse, Shania's meteoric rise felt like watching a dear friend sell their soul for sparkle. The late 1990s were dominated by Shania's anthems. Songs like Man, I Feel Like a Woman, and That Don't Impress Me Much were inescapable, blending country instrumentation with pop melodies and a glamorous, video-ready aesthetic. Nashville's business side was thrilled, seeing doors swing open to audiences that had never tuned into a country station before. But Willie, listening from his tour bus, heard something else. He famously told a sound engineer, "Country is supposed to bleed, not sparkle." The comment was a shot across the bow, a purist's lament against the rising tide of pop formula. The moment their personal Cold War became visible to the world was at a CMA awards ceremony. Shania Twain, the embodiment of this new, shiny era, walked away with the coveted Entertainer of the Year award. The cameras, always seeking reaction shots, found Willie Nelson sitting a few rows back. His face was a stoic mask, his applause polite but perfunctory. It was the applause of protocol, not praise. Backstage, he was heard muttering to a companion, "Entertainer, maybe, but that ain't country." Minutes later, the scene turned even chillier, brimming with the night's triumph. Shania approached Willie, her hand extended, a genuine smile on her face. What she received was a profound, silent dismissal. Willie offered a single, curt nod and walked past her as if she were a stranger. Industry observers called it arrogance, the bitterness of an old guard refusing change. Willie would have called it integrity, a refusal to validate what he saw as the hollowing out of the genre's essence. To him, Shania Twain represented the triumph of style over substance, of choreography over heartache, of a focus-grouped radio formula over the messy, real stories that define the classics. Even today, in the forgiving light of his later years, the mention of her name is often met with a deliberate change of subject. Of all the fractures, this one cuts to the core of his artistic creed. For a man who has forgiven robberies, tax troubles, and personal betrayals, Shania Twain remains the one who made him doubt the very future of the music he loved. The third estrangement, the brother who walked away. The previous estrangements were born of artistic disagreement. The next one, however, was a personal wound that cut deeper than any critique of music ever could. This story is about Waylon Jennings. This wasn't industry rivalry. This was family turning cold, a bond forged in the fire of the outlaw movement slowly freezing over from the inside. Together, Willie and Waylon were more than duet partners. They were revolutionaries. They fought the staid Nashville system, championed artistic control, and built a legacy of raw, authentic music on their own terms. They shared buses, bottles, and the deepest creative trust. But as their legend grew, a subtle poison began to seep in: jealousy. By the late 1970s, the phrase Willie and Waylon had cemented in the public consciousness, always in that order. For Waylon, a proud and complicated man, this constant secondary billing began to fester. He started showing up late to recording sessions they were meant to do together. The drinking, always a part of the lifestyle, grew harder, darker. Petty arguments over song credits and billing erupted. Where easy collaboration once lived, close friends recounted how Waylon would roll his eyes or make a sarcastic comment whenever a journalist referred to Willie as the face of outlaw country. The camaraderie was curdling into a quiet resentment. The breaking point came during a joint studio session. Tensions were high, and Waylon, in a moment of frustration, snapped at Willie in front of their crew, shouting, "You're too stoned to play straight." The insult was a public violation of their private code. Willie, famously unflappable, simply smiled and said nothing. But he never forgot. The final fracture happened in the early 1980s. During a magazine interview, Waylon, perhaps intending to be playfully barbed, called Willie a hippie in cowboy boots. Who'd forgotten where he came from? The reporters laughed. Willie did not. He finished the interview with quiet dignity, stood up, and walked away. The phone calls between the two legends, once constant, simply stopped. The friendship that defined an era of music was over. Years later, when Waylon Jennings passed away in 2002, the world expected a profound, public mourning from Willie. Instead, he did not attend the funeral. He sent a beautiful arrangement of flowers with a handwritten note that read, "See you on the road somewhere." Those 4 words were quintessential Willie, poetic, spiritual, and infinitely layered. To fans, it sounded like a hopeful farewell. But to those who knew the depth of the silence that had fallen between them, it spoke volumes. It was an acknowledgement of their shared journey, but also a silent admission that the personal betrayal, the brother's harsh word, had left a pain that even time and death could not completely heal. The fourth estrangement, the guitar and the flag. Music and politics have always danced together, but for Willie Nelson, there is a line where art stops and propaganda begins. This belief led him to a bitter and very public philosophical war with Toby Keith. This conflict wasn't about chords or melody. It was about the soul of a nation and the role of a songwriter in reflecting or inflaming its divisions. Willie, a veteran himself and a lifelong advocate for peace and farmers, once distilled his philosophy into a simple, powerful statement. A guitar should never wave a flag. While he never said Toby Keith's name in that quote, everyone in Nashville knew exactly whose arena-sized, flag-draped anthems he was referencing. The rift exploded in the early 2000s, following the release of Toby Keith's defiant post 9/11 anthem, courtesy of the red, white, and blue, the Angry American. To many, it was a cathartic expression of national pride and resilience. To Willie, it was jingoistic propaganda, using music to stoke anger rather than to heal a wounded spirit. The theoretical disagreement became painfully personal at a veterans' benefit concert in Austin. Willie had performed his set, offering songs of unity, solace, and shared humanity. Toby Keith took the stage after him. What followed, in Willie's view, was not a continuation of that healing mission. Keith's performance was a rally, a loud, proud, and aggressive celebration of patriotic fury. Willie watched from the side of the stage, his disgust visible. As Keith walked off to thunderous applause, Willie stepped into his path and said, coldly and clearly, "You're using music to fight, not to heal." Toby Keith, riding the high of the crowd's adulation, simply laughed and walked away. That dismissive laugh was the point of no return. From that day forward, Willie Nelson's camp operated with an unshakable rule. If Toby Keith was on the bill, Willie Nelson was not. He withdrew from festival lineups and benefit circuits they might have shared. Behind the scenes, he criticized Keith's act as a commercial wrapped in camouflage. Years later, perhaps sensing the permanence of the schism, Toby Keith attempted an olive branch, sending a message through a mutual friend asserting he meant no disrespect. Willie never responded. He confided in his inner circle, "I've met louder men, but not many emptier ones." This estrangement was foundational. It was about the moral responsibility of the artist. For Willie, Toby Keith had not just written a song he disagreed with. He had weaponized the very instrument Willie saw as a tool for connection, turning it into a blade for division. The fifth estrangement, the brother's betrayal. Betrayal from a rival is one thing. Betrayal from a brother is a wound that never truly closes. This is the story of Merle Haggard. Willie and Merle weren't just contemporaries. They were two sides of the same outlaw coin, architects of a sound that defined honesty in country music. They shared countless stages, wrote songs that spoke for the working man, and built a friendship in the grind of the road. Which is why, when Merle turned his wit against Willie, it cut deeper than any critic's pen ever could. It began subtly, with Merle Haggard making offhand comments in interviews. He'd joke about Willie's very public advocacy for cannabis, suggesting it had turned him from a serious musician into a mascot for the cause. At first, Willie, who genuinely loved Merle, brushed it off as just Hag being Hag. But the jokes continued, the tone sometimes edging from playful to pointed. The line was irrevocably crossed during a live performance, where both men were on the bill. With Willie sitting just off stage, Merle addressed the crowd. Into the microphone, with a chuckle, he said, "Weed's a lazy man's crutch." The audience roared with laughter. Willie Nelson did not smile. He finished his part of the set, his fingers never missing a note on trigger. But as soon as he walked off, he went straight to his bus. bypassing the usual backstage camaraderie. The silence that fell between them was deafening to those who knew their history. A planned collaborative album, eagerly awaited by fans, vanished from studio schedules without explanation. Phone calls from Merle's people to Willie's management went unreturned. The friendship, once a bedrock of the genre, had fractured over what Willie saw as a fundamental lack of respect. A brother mocking the very essence of his personal freedom and lifestyle. Years later, as age softened many old grudges, Merle Haggard attempted to make amends. Willie's response was quiet and final. Some things you don't joke about. It wasn't said with anger, but with the profound disappointment of a trust broken. When Merle passed away in 2016, Willie gave moving public tributes, calling him one of the greats. But close friends noted the specific wording. He did not say, "one of my best friends." That deliberate, poignant omission spoke louder than any eulogy. Their brotherhood ended not with a bang, but with a careless joke that revealed a disrespect Willie could not forgive. The sixth estrangement, the sentence that silenced a friendship. Can 4 decades of loyalty be destroyed by a single sentence? For Willie Nelson and Chris Christopherson, the tragic answer is yes. This rift is perhaps the most heartbreaking of all, because it involved two of the genre's most poetic souls, men who had stood shoulder to shoulder through every kind of storm, from industry battles to personal demons. Their bond was forged in the belief that words mattered, that songs could change the world. It was the ultimate irony, then, that words would be the thing to shatter it. The setting was a private, intimate fundraiser in the mid-2000s. The room was full of songwriters, activists, and friends. Willie had just finished performing a sparse, haunting ballad, one of his politically charged songs about the plight of farm workers or the futility of war. It was a moment of raw, artistic sincerity. As he stepped off the small stage, Chris Christopherson, surrounded by a circle of admirers and perhaps loosened by the whiskey of the evening, made a comment. Leaning in, he repeated a cruel refrain Willie had heard before, but never from him. Willie's turned into more of a mascot than a musician. The people around, Chris laughed, but Willie, within earshot, heard it. Witnesses said he simply froze, the warmth draining from his face. He turned without a word and walked out into the night. The next morning, the machinery of estrangement went into motion. His assistant canceled all upcoming collaborative plans with Christopherson. Phone calls went unanswered. When pressed by friends or journalists in the years that followed, Willie would only offer a cryptic, poetic explanation. Sometimes words don't fade. They stain. Chris, realizing the colossal error, tried to apologize through mutual friends. Willie's response was quiet and absolute. "You don't get to call me brother after that." This was the deepest cut of all. It wasn't just criticism. It was a betrayal of a shared language. Christopherson, a Rhodes Scholar and one of the greatest lyricists of his generation, had used his words not to build up, but to tear down. Not in private, but in the semi-public arena they both inhabited. For Willie, it proved that even the most profound bonds could be severed by a moment of casual cruelty. Years of shared history, of writing songs on the same motel notepads, of defending each other's art, evaporated overnight, leaving only the stain of those careless words. The seventh estrangement, the wild experiment that failed. The final break on our list is different in tone, but no less definitive. It is the story of a collaboration that was never meant to be. A clash of generations and philosophies that ended not with a slow freeze, but with a walkout. This is about the day Willie Nelson met Kid Rock in the studio. In the late 2000s, Kid Rock was in his self-styled American badass phase, blending rock, rap, and southern rock bravado. He reached out to Willie, pitching an idea for a rebellious, genre-bending anthem, a meeting of outlaw minds. Willie, ever the curious artist and open to new sounds, agreed. He saw potential for an interesting, gritty fusion. The session, however, derailed almost immediately. Willie arrived ready to work, to find the music in the collaboration. Kid Rock arrived late, treating the studio less as a workshop and more as a party venue. He was loud, brash, and reportedly more interested in creating a chaotic vibe than in crafting a song. Engineers and musicians present recalled Kid Rock blasting his own tracks over the studio speakers, drowning out any chance for subtlety. Willie, ever the professional, tried to steer the ship. He suggested a softer arrangement, a space where both their styles could meet. Kid Rock, according to those accounts, laughed it off. He looked at the living legend across from him and said, "Come on, old man. Loosen up." In that moment, the cultural chasm became unbridgeable. Loosen up was perhaps the most insulting phrase one could say to Willie Nelson, a man who had built his life on a relaxed, authentic philosophy. Willie didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood up, removed his headphones, placed them gently on the stand, and walked out of the studio. The session was over. The track was scrapped forever. When asked about it later, Willie offered a typically zen, yet dismissive, explanation. Some fires are better left unlit. But the meaning was clear. To Willie, Kid Rock represented the worst kind of artist. All volume and posture with no substance. A loud voice with nothing real to say. He saw not a fellow rebel, but a caricature of rebellion. Since that day, every subsequent invitation from Kid Rock's camp has been refused. It was a clean, decisive break, a refusal to lend his hard-earned authenticity to what he viewed as mere noise. The story of these 7 estrangements is not a tale of a grumpy old man holding petty grudges. It is the revelation of a moral and artistic code that has guided Willie Nelson for over 9 decades. Each break tells us what he values most: authenticity over spectacle, sincerity over sales, substance over sparkle, loyalty over rivalry, healing over division, respect over mockery. He didn't cut these people off because they were successful. He walked away when he felt they compromised the soul of the music or the sanctity of friendship. In Garth Brooks and Shania Twain, he saw the commodification of country's heart. In Waylon Jennings and Chris Christopherson, he felt the deep sting of a brother's betrayal. In Toby Keith, he witnessed the weaponization of song. In Merle Haggard, he endured the ridicule of a chosen family member. In Kid Rock, he encountered a disrespect for the craft itself. Time could have healed many of these wounds, and perhaps in some private ways, it has softened the edges. But forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Willie Nelson's legacy is one of peace, but it is a peace he has forged on his own terms, often by quietly removing himself from situations and people that violate his core principles. So, was he right? The answer depends on what you believe an artist owes the world. If you believe an artist's role is to evolve, entertain, and expand the audience at all costs, then his stance may seem rigid. But if you believe an artist is a guardian of a certain truth, a keeper of a flame that must not be extinguished by commercialism or falsehood, then every one of these estrangements was an act of profound integrity. In the end, Willie Nelson plays himself better than anybody. And part of playing himself means knowing when to say a quiet no, when to turn and walk away, and when to protect the sacred, bruised heart of the music that has been his life's only constant companion. The Buddha of country music may not preach peace anymore, but in drawing these lines, he has given us a masterclass in the cost of staying true to one's own soul.